As many of you are likely aware, the new Lil Nas X video, Montero, also known as Call Me By Your Name, has garnered some major backlash for iconography that a lot of Christians are taking as blasphemous. I personally don't understand what all the fuss is about. The symbolism in the video is clearly Hellenic when you take a bird's eye view, and I, for one, am thrilled to see such an unabashed celebration of the classics in a popular music video. Don't believe me? Take up your cameras and your pens. We're going on a crusade. Kairete. This is the first entry into my new Film Crusade series, which I've been promising since my New Year's stream at the end of 2020 to launch this year. I originally planned to launch with a video involving Star Wars collaborating with another creator, and that video is still coming, but for the life of me, I just couldn't help myself from commenting on this masterpiece of a music video. Every frame is packed with color, imagery, and meaning, and even though I'm not personally the biggest fan of R&B or rap, the song is a bop. If the song lyrics are a statement, this video gives that statement a megaphone. Because of YouTube's copyright system, however, I'm going to be playing clips of the video without sound and stopping on several frames to discuss symbolism. Sometimes with a reference to the lyrics that are playing during the scene, if they're applicable to the symbolism, and sometimes not. There is a lot of myth to go through. So, if you haven't had the incredible experience of watching the video in its entirety, you should probably go do that for context. Link is in the description to the official upload from Nas X's channel. The video opens in the clouds with a quote. "In life, we hide the parts of ourselves we don't want the world to see. We lock them away. We tell them no. We banish them. But here, we don't. Welcome to Montero." We then get a pan over a buried Parthenon, a massive statue of what appears to be Nas's Zeus, a lot of buried columns, and some Roman aqueducts, follows a black and red snake slithering towards Nas, who is sitting at the base of a massive purple tree with hanging fruit. This quote tells us a few things. Nas's name is Montero, so in typical Greek fashion, we're told that we're in his mindscape and that we're about to see is allegorical. The architecture is also the first clue that the symbolism we're about to see is entirely Hellenic. The presence of the aqueducts showcases that this story takes place in the Hellenistic era, which is echoed later when we see Nas put on trial in the Colosseum by a bunch of bronze and silver statues of himself, along with himself as 4 judges. We'll get to that in a moment, but for now, I'd like to establish that we're pretty clearly dealing with Greek myth. Nas begins strumming his guitar, talking about how he'd been called upon by a mysterious you. And when we get the reply from his would-be amour, it's pretty clear that it's another man. This figure takes the form of a snake-human hybrid, but it also has the face of Lil Nas X. If you look closely while he's being chased by this mysterious snake-like figure, you'll notice that he passes a dryad or nymph with a figure's face, and a bloom springs up from the ground that also has the snake figure's face in it. The bloom looks a heck of a lot like a narcissus flower with a few extra petals, and the snake's man's face is in the central portion of the flower. The dryad or nymph, which were basically nature spirits, they were closer to the gods than humans, but not by much. The garden and the narcissus all come from the Homeric hymn to Demeter, when Persephone was kidnapped and taken down to Hyades for matrimony against her will. She was out in the field picking flowers with her nymph friends when Gaia produced the narcissus in order to distract her long enough for Hyades to sweep her up and carry off to the underworld with her father Zeus's permission. This was symbolic of a major rite of passage for women in ancient Greece, often spirited away by their fathers or husbands to ensure they wouldn't try to run away before marriage. I'm not defending this practice as okay by modern standards by any means. I've talked about it extensively in other videos, but the symbolism certainly lines up here with a loss of innocence and a rite of passage. We get additional support for this idea when the snake person's face also appears in the clouds with lightning behind it, as Zeus gave his sanction for this kidnapping. One final bit of support we get is that the fruit hanging on the tree he's sitting against, it looks strikingly like a pomegranate, the fruit that Hyades tricked Persephone into eating a few seeds out of in order to force her to stay at least part-time in his realm. The pomegranate was a potent symbol in ancient Greece, often given as an offering in funerary rites and seen as symbolic of the rite of passage into adulthood for women. But what about the snake symbolism? I can already hear you in the background. Overplayed jokes about body parts aside, this one is found in Greek mythology in more than a few places. In fact, if you're interested in the Snakes of Greek Mythology video, let me know down in the comments. There's a lot of them. Remember how I mentioned that we're in Nas's mindscape here as he's grappling with himself? We'll get more into what he's struggling with later, but for now, I should note that we're going to see layers of symbolism in each of the 3 acts of the story that he's telling in the video that will often come from multiple sources playing on similar themes. Creation and the fall from innocence, or passage into adulthood, is often found in many myths, but one of the other major ones involves a monstrous woman named Echidna. I'll get back to that soon. Wait, you're thinking, Lil Nas X is gay and that creature is a male creature and also clearly him, what gives? Every being in the mindscapes of this video is Lil Nas X. It makes sense that in a culture that largely rewards closeting and the rejection of the self as simple, that he would personify his sexuality as the literal mother of monsters. Echidna was the consort to Tophon, who was a monstrous snake man hybrid dragon thing that ended up challenging Zeus for the throne and losing, and was said to have birthed Kerberos, the Hydra, the Nemean lion, Scylla, and so many other monsters that heroes later had to go out and take care of. Echidna resembles the Lamie, or the female half-snake, half-woman monsters who would lure men in disguise to kill them. Given the quote at the beginning about trying to kill parts of ourselves and banish them in life, and given quotes in interviews Nas has given about how he swore to closet for the rest of his life, to not be one of those gay guys, as he put it, the personification as Echidna or a Lamia makes a ton of sense. Especially given the very sexual nature of the encounter here. He's hypnotized by this part of himself and gives in as the camera swings away to a quote in Greek on the tree he was just sitting at. That quote, for the record, comes from Plato's Symposium and actually adds a 3rd mythic set to the symbolism here. It translates roughly to, and then he split them in 2, each longing for its mate, and refers to a particular creation fable that also is thought to explain the origins of sexual minorities among humans. The myth goes something like this. Humans were originally these bizarre hybrids of 2 people stuck together. 2 heads, 4 arms, 4 legs, 2 sets of genitals, etc. The genitals are important, because which genitals these weird creatures had determined which so-called race they were. The children of the moon were the most numerous and were male-female, the children of the earth were female-female, and the children of the sun were male-male. Keep this in the back of your mind for a tick. These weird creatures would tumble about in cartwheels to get around and had greater strength than humans. Zeus apparently got worried that they'd rise up and try to overthrow the gods, so he split them in 2. Problem is, their genitals were facing the wrong direction. The pitiful creatures kept trying to reunite with their other halves, but things weren't quite positioned right, so they risked starving themselves and not offering to the gods anymore in their misery. Out of pity, Apollon sews them back together, but they still long for their other half, and that's where the attraction comes from. Keep in mind, Plato told this story to rip it apart and ridicule the concept of soulmates, but in terms of symbolism, it's powerful, and I can see why that quote is there. Going back to the first act of the video, Nas is in all gold, and when he comes into contact with his other half, this monstrous being with his face and a drive to make love to him, he's wearing shining gold. You know, like the sun, after starting in a sunny sky to get to a scene in the first place. All of this seems pretty dang Hellenic to me, don't you think? After the zoom in on the tree, we move into the second act, in which Nas is dragged in chains by 2 blue versions of himself. The version that is singing is in pink with a pink wig and wears 2 important symbols that both tie back to the first act. The first is slung across his shoulder. See the ram horns? The golden fleece that Jason was sent off to get is said to be of a golden ram that was kept in the gardens of Ares. The second is around his waist. Notice the lion's face there? That would be the Nemean lion, slain by Heracles, but also birthed by the aforementioned Echidna. Keep in mind, Heracles also had another association with Echidna. It was said that in one version of the myth, she seduced him and convinced him to lay with her, and that the sons that she produced, the strongest of them, who could lift and use some items that he left behind with her, would end up going on to produce the Scythians. They were said to have been descended of Heracles. Both Jason and Heracles were sent on seemingly impossible missions by people trying to get rid of them, and both of them have vices related to the themes of the song overall. These missions were intended to kill them and get them out of the way of loved ones or family members who either lusted for power or held a grudge, depending on which one you're talking about. You know, kind of like the conversion camps that a lot of Christian parents send their kids off to in the hopes that they'll be out of their way and come back quote-unquote normal, whatever that means. My friend Suris did a great video on why these camps are abusive and shouldn't be legal, and why in many places they're not legal, and how that needs to be the case pretty much everywhere. I digress, abuse ticks me off. As I covered in my video on what makes a Greek hero, a tragic death is essential to a potential hero cult. These heroes' vices and deaths were also similar. Heracles died to jealousy from a lover over a concubine he took at the end of his life. He was specifically killed by the Hydra's blood found in a centaur's blood that he killed with it. The centaur convinced his jealous wife that his blood would make Heracles faithful forever, and after he took the concubine, she gave it to him by dipping his shirt in it, and he died horribly. And by horribly, I mean horribly. It said that it was burning through his flesh and skin, but because of his denying nature, he couldn't die until Philoctetes, who was fairly close to him, ended up lighting his funerary pyre to finally finish the job so Hera could take his soul partially to Olympus and partially to Hades. Yeah, Heracles is weird. I'm going to do a video on him at some point. Y'all already told me you want me to. Jason, on the other hand, dies alone and on the run after cheating on his wife Medea, who had been instrumental in his ability to perform the majority of the feats he did with the Argonauts. Their vices were lust and greed respectively, and the lyrics for this selection, as well as the imagery, bears this out. He talks about his fantasies with the mysterious person from the first verse, and then in the same breath condemns himself for his vices after becoming famous. The judges, 5 of himself, are clad in denim while he has the more salacious and glorious garments despite being in chains. Bronze and silver statues of himself pelt him with what turn out to be butt plugs, and he dies. We keep coming back to the quote at the beginning, but it seems that over and over he is trying to kill a part of himself here. He sees himself as performing heroic acts of strength, recovering these impossible artifacts of antiquity, only to come back to a trial where he's killed and condemned. His soul rises to a winged figure, likely either Eros, the attendant to Aphrodite and also the god of lust and the one who pricks you when you first fall in love, or Hermes, the messenger of the gods who also played a role in leading the dead to Hades, until a stripper pole lands in his hand and he changes his outfit. Note how all the scenery comes into focus just as he does, including himself. In the majority of the video up until this point, everything was just a little hazy except for the characters he played. The garden blurs a bit as he runs through it, the trial is just a little out of focus apart from the testimony he gives about himself and the judgmental stares of the assigned gentry judges, and even his soul is glowing with a weird ethereal light. When he grabs the pole and strips all the way down in what I believe is one of the most iconic moments I've seen in a music video since Gaga's triumphant Born This Way strut, everything becomes more in focus, more real. The pole going down to the earth also lines up with Greek myth, as does the inability for Eros or Hermes to follow once he gets down there. Apart from deities that ruled the dead, the gods were said to have an allergy of a sort to miasma, which I did a video on if you missed it, unable to follow even the most cherished mortals into the underworld. And it was said that the domain of Hades was as far under the earth as the earth was to the sky. Grinding down that pole the whole way to honor a deity he clearly felt close to as one final act of worship is beautiful in its way, and also showcases his show of acceptance of this seeming vice into his identity. When he lands in Tartaros, and it is Tartaros by the way, Tartaros was said to be where flaming rivers met, was said to have a beast, sometimes called the Hydra, perched above the gates, and the 100-handed ones were said to guard said gates. The gate that opens here looks like it's made out of reaching hands, which lines up with these guards. It's also said to be a castle perched in the middle of a lake of fire, and what is more fire than lava? When he walks in, on his left you see 2 statues of himself. They each mimic surviving statues of Hades and Persephone respectively, which only makes sense in Tartaros given that it was said to be a part of Hades' domain. And the figure he gives the oh-so-controversial lap dance to? Either he's posing as a Fury here, as the Furies were said to punish oathbreakers, and by making this video he's breaking the oath he made to himself to never come out publicly, or that figure is Kronos, if you go by the older Hesiodic descriptions of Tartaros as the place where the Titans got tossed after Zeus overthrew them. Keep in mind that this idea of the Oathbreaker also seems to line up with what's on the ground there. The Latin at the base of the circle says they condemn that which they do not understand, which would line up with his fear and the reasons for making his oath. The post-Plato Tartaros was a place where most people who got sent there by the judges of the dead were punished for a set time and released, either by rebirth or to the fields of Asphodel after their issues with the gods had been purged from them through punishment. The main exceptions were people sent to Tartaros directly by the gods, such as Sisyphos, or people that were sent by the judges that had crimes on the level of nations. Basically, if you weren't a king or an emperor or from one of the ages before the Age of Iron that we're currently living in, you likely won't be stuck there forever. So the idea of doing this lap dance as an acceptance of the self, then getting out, is absolutely in line with Greek mythology. Unlike some punishment systems, for the majority, Tartaros was not forever. Alright, I know what you're thinking. There are interviews out there where the director and Nas explain the symbolism, it's not all Hellenic and there are definitely other influences there, plus the shoes! 1. Death of the author is a thing, look it up. 2. Nas just came out of the closet and got spat on by Christian society. You think he's gonna come out of the broom closet too? And 3. The shoes are pagan as hell too. After all, hell got most of its trappings and symbolism from syncretism involving Tartaros, just minus the redemption part. Guess the religion with mercy at its core missed a few things. Either way, the Hellenic explanation makes a lot more sense than a being that is somehow both Eve and the snake at the same time, while having a Greek creation myth quote be the Zoom after lovemaking begins. And hell having Greek statues only makes sense if you're Virgil. What's biblical about the Colosseum and his clothing exactly? Apart from maybe the idea that at one point Christians basically wanted to get martyred there? Hopefully, this puts some of the controversy to rest. It's not Christian blasphemy, it's a celebration of Hellenic culture and myth. So cut your complaining, alright? Not everything always has to be about the Bible and spiting Christians. Thank you so much for sticking through that. If you're new here, pole dance the subscribe button and pelt your inner self with the like. Drop down into the comments and let me know what symbolism you noticed and what you missed, or just tell me that the authorial interviews are the only authority and send me a link to stuff I've already read if that's your speed. Also, yes, I know about Jesus, and no, I'm going to Hydace, not Hell. Hopefully the fields of Asphodel, because our chances of getting into Elysium are pretty low. Thank you also so much to my patrons. You all encouraged me to make this one when I popped off in my patron chat about it, and I'm so glad you did. Digging up all the symbolism for the script has been a blast, as has digging deeper into some of the myths that I haven't talked about as much on this channel yet. The fact that I have an audience who would dig me breaking down a lefty R&B video in a pagan way is incredible. May the cycle of reciprocity between us ever remain positive. And remember, stories shape lives.